I was on the road later than I should have been. It wasn't the kind of night I wanted to drive through. The sky was heavy and black, clouds hanging low so there wasn't even moonlight to soften the darkness. I had been working all day out of town, and I just wanted to get home. I told myself it would be fine, just a 2-hour drive on mostly empty highways, but as soon as I got going, I knew it was going to test me. The highway stretched out ahead of me, one long strip of cracked pavement with my headlights carving a pale tunnel through the black. On either side, the land rolled away into fields and patches of woods, but in the dark they might as well have been endless voids. My headlights lit the weeds at the edge of the shoulder and the white paint lines, but beyond that was nothing. I kept both hands firm on the wheel, trying not to think too much, just focusing on staying steady in my lane. For the first half hour, I saw almost no one. A couple of semis passed going the other direction, their lights exploding across my windshield before vanishing in the mirrors. Each time it was like a quick flash of reality, a reminder that there were still other people out there, but the silence after they were gone felt even heavier. My car hummed, the tires droning on the rough pavement, and every bump in the road sent a faint vibration through the steering wheel. The empty feeling out there got under my skin. I kept glancing into the mirrors even though I knew nothing was behind me. My taillights glowed red in the dark and then fell away into nothingness. The more I stared, the more it felt like something might suddenly appear, so I forced myself to keep my eyes forward. About 40 miles in, I noticed something strange. The road dipped into a stretch of trees, the kind that close in so tight they block out the sky. Just before I entered that section, I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder. First, I thought someone had broken down. The car's hood was up, and the driver's door hung wide open, but there were no hazard lights blinking, no movement around it. Just a silent car half in the grass, one headlight smashed in. The sight made my chest tighten. An abandoned car on the side of a road that empty, with the door left open, didn't feel right. I slowed a little as I passed, leaning slightly to glance inside as my headlights swept over it. The interior looked empty, no one in the seats. I couldn't see much beyond that. My first instinct was to think someone might be in trouble, but another part of me, the louder part, told me not to stop. Not out here, not with no phone service and nothing but black woods on either side. I pressed the gas and kept going, forcing myself not to check the mirrors until it was long behind me. But my nerves were awake now. The woods on either side seemed darker, heavier. My high beams lit up the road but also made every tree trunk leap into sharp contrast, like 1,000 thin figures standing shoulder to shoulder. My knuckles tightened on the wheel. After another 15 minutes, I got the feeling I wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't anything obvious, just that creeping instinct you get sometimes. I flicked my eyes up to the rearview mirror, and my stomach sank. A pair of headlights had appeared far back on the road. They were small, faint, but definitely there. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just another late-night driver heading the same way. But the lights didn't move the way I expected. They didn't get closer, they didn't fall behind. They stayed at the same distance, no matter if I sped up a little or slowed down. I tried to ignore it. I focused on the dashed lines ticking by, on the sound of the engine, on anything but the steady glow behind me. But the longer it went on, the more it got into my head. Why weren't they passing? Why weren't they falling back? It felt deliberate, like they were choosing to hang back just far enough for me to see them. I pressed my foot down, letting the car push up 10 miles over the limit. The tires hummed louder, the road seemed to whip by faster, and for a minute the lights dipped behind a hill. Relief flickered through me, but then they reappeared. Same distance, same glow. By then my heart was beating hard. The steering wheel felt slick in my palms. I couldn't shake the thought that whoever was back there was following me on purpose. I didn't know why, but I couldn't think of another explanation. The highway eventually hit a fork. To the left, the main route led toward bigger towns and the interstate. To the right, a smaller county road cut through farmland and curved back toward home. On impulse, I took the right. My tires bumped over the uneven joint where the pavement changed, and suddenly I was on a narrower, darker road with no painted lines and weeds creeping onto the shoulder. For a moment, I thought I'd shaken them. The headlights didn't appear behind me when I glanced back. My chest eased a little, my grip loosening. I told myself I had just been paranoid, that maybe they weren't following me at all and had just stayed on the highway. But a few bends later, I saw them again. Two faint orbs of light on the horizon behind me, creeping into view as if they had been waiting for me to notice. I felt a cold rush in my gut. It wasn't coincidence. I pressed harder on the gas, my car rattling as it climbed in speed. The road was rough and curved often, lined with fields and the occasional fence post glinting in my headlights. I knew I shouldn't drive too fast here, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I checked the mirror, those lights were still there, never closer, never farther. By the time I saw the faint orange glow of the town ahead, I was gripping the wheel so hard my hands ached. The streetlights looked like safety, little pools of civilization waiting for me. I slowed as I entered the first streets, the houses appearing, porches dark, yards empty. I flicked my eyes up one more time to the mirror. The headlights were gone, just gone. No slow turn-off, no brake lights fading away. One moment they were there, steady as ever, and the next the road behind me was empty. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near the center of town. I pulled up under the fluorescent lights, put the car in park, and just sat there for a long while, engine running. My hands were trembling so badly I had to wipe them on my jeans. I kept looking around the lot, waiting for a car to pull in behind me, but none did. Even now, I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it was someone messing around, maybe it was nothing at all. But the way they matched me for mile after mile, holding that same distance, made it feel deliberate. And the way they vanished as soon as I hit town still makes my skin crawl. To this day, I can't drive a back road at night without checking my mirrors too much. I keep waiting for those headlights to reappear, steady and patient, just far enough back to remind me I'm not alone. I booked an Airbnb with a friend last summer. We hadn't seen each other in years. College had pulled us in different directions, and the idea of renting a place for a weekend sounded like the perfect way to catch up. We chose a quiet cabin just outside a small mountain town, far enough from everything that you couldn't hear cars or neighbors. The listing looked perfect, cozy, modern, a big deck with a view of pine trees. We split the cost and planned to spend 3 days hiking, cooking, and doing nothing else. When we arrived, the place looked even better than in the pictures. The road to get there wound up a steep dirt trail, surrounded by tall trees and thick brush. The cabin was built on a small clearing with just enough space for one car to park. There was another cabin about a quarter-mile away, but it was hidden behind trees. The air smelled like rain and pine. Inside, it was simple, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living room with big glass doors that opened to the deck. It felt quiet in a way that city noise never lets you feel. We settled in, unpacked our stuff, and made dinner. The first night felt calm and easy. We drank a couple of beers, laughed about old stories, and stayed up late listening to music. When I finally went to bed, I remember the sound of rain starting to hit the roof. It was steady, rhythmic, and strangely soothing. The next morning, I woke up early. The rain had stopped, but the world outside was damp and foggy. My friend was still asleep, so I made coffee and sat on the deck. The forest was silent except for a few distant bird calls. I noticed something odd on the wooden railing. Faint muddy smudges, like fingerprints. I thought maybe my friend had leaned there the night before, but the prints were too small for his hands. They were thin, narrow, and spaced low, as if a child had pressed their fingers there. It seemed strange, but I didn't dwell on it. We spent most of that day hiking. The trails were slick from the rain, and the fog made everything look endless and gray. When we got back in the afternoon, both of us were covered in mud and starving. We cooked, showered, and spent the evening just sitting on the deck again as the sun went down. I noticed the same prints were still there, faint but visible. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. I wasn't sure why at first, maybe the sound of something moving outside. The cabin creaked sometimes from the wind, but this was different. It was rhythmic, faintly metallic, like something brushing against the deck railing. I sat up, listening. It stopped after a few seconds. The forest outside was pitch black. I thought maybe it was an animal, raccoon or deer, and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, my friend looked pale and tired. He said he hadn't slept well. He said he kept hearing what sounded like someone walking outside the cabin, slow and steady. I told him I'd heard something too, though I didn't see anything when I checked the deck. When we stepped outside later, we noticed fresh mud near the door, smeared across the wooden boards. There were footprints this time, small, bare feet. The shape was clear, 5 distinct toes, pressed right up to the glass door. Neither of us said much, but the mood changed after that. We went for another hike, but it felt uneasy. Every time we heard branches snap or leaves shift, both of us turned instinctively. It started raining again halfway through, and by the time we made it back to the cabin, the fog was rolling in thick and low. That night, we decided to keep the lights on in the living room. It felt stupid, but neither of us wanted to sit in total darkness. The sound of the rain covered most noise, but around midnight I started hearing it again. That faint, soft creaking on the deck. My friend was on the couch half asleep, and I just sat there, staring toward the sliding glass doors. Then, in a brief flash of lightning, I saw it. A figure, small and crouched low by the railing. The flash was quick, but the image burned into my brain. A shape, dark and still, right where those prints had been earlier. My chest felt tight. I didn't move. The next flash came a few seconds later, and the shape was gone. Neither of us slept that night. When dawn came, we went outside and looked. There were fresh prints again. Small, bare, muddy feet. They led across the deck, stopping just before the sliding door. A few pine needles were stuck to the boards, pressed into the wet wood as if someone had been crawling instead of walking. We decided to leave that day. We were supposed to stay one more night, but we both felt it. That weird, heavy feeling that something wasn't right. We started packing, but my friend's car battery was dead. We hadn't left any lights on in the car, but the dome light was flickering faintly when we tried to start it. The key turned, but nothing happened. We sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to think. There was no cell service, no neighbors in sight, and the closest town was about a half-hour drive down the mountain. I decided to walk down the road until I could get a signal. My friend stayed behind with the car. The road was muddy and slick from the rain, and the fog made it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. The woods on both sides were quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots squelching through wet dirt. After about 20 minutes, I finally saw a faint bar of signal appear on my phone. I stopped and called roadside assistance. They said they'd send someone, but it would take a few hours. When I got back to the cabin, the sky had started to darken again. The fog was thicker than before. My friend was standing on the deck, staring toward the tree line. I asked him what was wrong, but he just pointed. Near the edge of the woods, maybe 30 feet away, was something hanging from a branch. At first, I thought it was trash caught in the trees. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a small bundle of sticks tied together with what looked like twine. It was hanging low, just swinging slightly in the wind. There were others too higher up, for maybe 5 of them, each shaped like a rough human figure. They hadn't been there before. We went inside and shut the door. Neither of us said a word. We just sat there, waiting for the tow truck to arrive. Hours passed. The fog thickened to the point where we could barely see past the deck. The only light came from the lamps inside the cabin, casting reflections against the glass. Sometime after 6 o'clock, I saw movement again, a faint shape at the edge of the deck, low to the ground. It crawled forward slowly, its outline barely visible through the mist. My stomach turned cold. My friend saw it too. I could see the color drain from his face. Then the shape moved closer, close enough that the outline sharpened. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, small, thin, crawling on hands and knees. Mud smeared up their legs and arms. Their head turned slightly toward the light. That's when I noticed. They were covered in twigs and leaves, almost camouflaged. Their face streaked dark with dirt. We didn't move. We didn't speak. The person stopped at the edge of the deck, then slowly stood up. For a few seconds, they just stood there, staring at the cabin. Then they turned and disappeared into the fog. We heard the tow truck sometime after dark. The headlights cut through the fog like two white tunnels. I ran out first, waving my arms, and the driver looked confused when he saw how pale we both were. We didn't explain. We just wanted to leave. When I looked back one last time as we drove off, I saw the deck light flicker. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing there again, watching. A week later, my friend texted me saying he'd gone through the photos on his phone. He had taken some pictures of the forest on our first day, just random shots of the trees and trails. In one of them, faintly visible between the trunks, there was a figure standing. Small, thin, head tilted slightly, almost blending into the background. I still don't know what that person wanted. Maybe they lived out there, hidden in the woods, watching anyone who came close. Maybe they'd been coming to that cabin long before we showed up. But what still keeps me up some nights isn't the prints or the twigs or even the figure itself. It's that first morning, when I saw the tiny handprints on the railing. They weren't just random smudges. They were placed there carefully, almost lined up, like someone wanted us to see them, to know that they'd already been close enough to touch the place we were sleeping in. I booked that Airbnb because it was cheap, quiet, and close to the research center where I was doing a short contract. It was one of those listings that looked too simple to be suspicious. Plain photos, a few lines of description, nothing flashy. It was called the Greenhouse on Willow Pond, a small cabin tucked away behind someone's larger property on the edge of a rural town. The listing said it was close to nature and ideal for guests seeking calm. When I arrived, the host wasn't there, but they'd left a metal lockbox by the door. Inside, the key and a printed packet of property rules. I flipped through it while standing on the porch. Most of it was standard: no smoking, no parties, take out the trash. But one section near the bottom caught my eye. It said, "In all seriousness, hummingbirds are considered legal tender under regional bird law statutes. Guests are expected to respect this policy. Please do not interfere with hummingbird activity on or near the premises. Violations may result in fines." Sounded like a joke, but the tone of the rest of the rules was so formal that I wasn't sure. Legal tender? I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of local wildlife protection thing. Still, it made me laugh a little. I tossed the packet on the kitchen counter and didn't think much of it again that day. The cabin itself was small but cozy. One bedroom, a tiny living room, and a kitchenette. Everything was green. The curtains, the rug, even the dishes had hummingbirds printed on them. There were paintings of them on the walls and small glass feeders hanging outside every window. The moment I noticed that, I realized I could hear them, the soft, constant hum of wings, like distant static. Hundreds of them. When I stepped outside to look, I saw at least a dozen hovering near each feeder, darting back and forth with quick jerks of motion. Their feathers caught the light in flashes of red, green, and gold. They were beautiful, but the sheer number of them made the air feel alive. Their wings moved so fast it created a constant vibration, like a pulse running through the yard. By evening, that sound never stopped. Even with the windows closed, I could hear them buzzing, colliding lightly with the glass, hovering near the light fixtures outside. When I went to bed, the noise followed me into my dreams. The next morning, I woke up to something strange. On the small table by the bed, there was a pile of coins, at least a dozen small metallic discs I hadn't seen before. They weren't regular coins. Each one had an engraving of a hummingbird mid-flight, wings spread wide. The edges were uneven, like they'd been handmade. I hadn't put them there, and I knew they hadn't been there the night before. I turned one over. The back said 1 nectar unit. It looked like a souvenir, but it didn't make sense. I hadn't bought anything, and the doors had been locked all night. The coins were cool to the touch, faintly sticky, as if someone had handled them with something sweet. I left them where they were and went out for groceries, trying not to think about it. When I got back, more coins were waiting, this time on the kitchen counter. A neat little stack, placed perfectly in the center. And there was something else. A single dead hummingbird lying beside them. Its feathers still shimmered faintly in the light, and its beak was sticky with what looked like nectar. There were no signs of injury, no blood, nothing. It just looked like it had stopped mid-flight and dropped. I cleaned it up, wrapped it in paper towels, and took it outside. The feeders were still swarming with others, darting and feeding like nothing had happened. I set the little body near a bush and went back in, trying to convince myself that it was coincidence. Maybe it just hit a window. That night I couldn't sleep. The humming got louder, so constant it seemed to fill the walls. I kept thinking about those coins, how they'd appeared twice, always with something dead near them. Around midnight, I got up to check the windows. Outside, the yard was full of movement. The air looked alive with hundreds of tiny bodies flickering in and out of the porch light. It was mesmerizing, but unsettling too. The next morning, I woke to find the same thing again. Another stack of those strange coins. Another dead hummingbird. Same spot on the counter. I started to feel sick looking at it. I went through the cabin trying to find cameras, thinking maybe it was a prank or some weird Airbnb experience. There were none. Just feeders, plants, and those coins. The fridge was empty except for a few bottles of sugar water labeled "Property of the host. Do not consume." That afternoon, while walking around the yard, I noticed a small wooden box nailed to a fence post near the back. It looked like a birdhouse, but there was a sign on it that said "Collection Point, Authorized Use Only." Inside was a pile of those same coins, stacked neatly like currency in a cash drawer. Each coin had the same engraving, the hummingbird mid-flight, and the same sticky texture. I could smell the faint sweetness of nectar coming from the box. The idea that someone was actually collecting these made my stomach turn. The next day, I decided to leave early. I messaged the host saying I'd cut the trip short and would check out by noon. I didn't get a reply. When I started packing, I noticed something that froze me. On the table where the coins had been appearing, there was a note. Not handwritten, but typed, printed cleanly in black ink. Guests must settle balances before departure. Current owed amount, 42 nectar units. Payment accepted in tender only. I dropped the note and backed away. I hadn't agreed to pay anything beyond the Airbnb fee. I didn't know what tender meant in this context, but the word made me think of those birds, the coins, the feeders. I didn't want to find out. I grabbed my bag and opened the door to leave, but when I stepped outside, the noise hit me like a wall. The air was thick with wings. Hundreds, maybe thousands of hummingbirds were hovering low over the porch, darting and whirring in tight, chaotic patterns. I had to cover my face as I tried to move through them. They brushed against my arms, my neck, my face. I could feel the air from their wings on my skin like static. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I looked back, they were all gathered around the cabin again, clustering near the windows, the feeders, the roofline. It was like the whole building was wrapped in a living cloud. I drove away shaking, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. When I stopped at a gas station a few miles out of town, I noticed something wedged under my windshield wiper. It was another coin, a 1 nectar unit. I didn't take it off. I just drove until I reached the next city and found a cheap hotel. That night, I put everything from my bags on the floor and went through it, trying to make sure none of those coins had come with me. But one had. It was sitting at the bottom of my duffel bag, smeared with something red. The next morning, I checked my email. There was a message from the Airbnb host. "Thank you for your stay. Your account has been credited for partial payment. Outstanding balance remains." That was it. No name, no signature, just that. A few weeks later, a friend told me they'd seen the listing disappear from Airbnb. When I looked it up again, it was gone. No greenhouse on Willow Pond, no host named Brian, no trace of it. I figured maybe the property was delisted or banned. But the part that still unsettles me is what I found out later, after some searching. That area actually has a regional conservation regulation involving hummingbirds. The clause literally defines them as a protected migratory commodity, meaning fines, research credits, and certain environmental payments can legally be represented in hummingbird quantities, alive or dead. It's not a metaphor. It's written into local law. So when that host said hummingbirds were a legal tender, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't some art piece or eccentric rule. It was literal. And somehow, I had ended up owing something that couldn't be paid in dollars. I still have that one coin. I tried throwing it away, but every time I check, it's back, on my desk, in my pocket, even once inside my car cup holder. The surface is still faintly sticky, still smells like nectar. And every spring, when I start hearing that familiar hum outside my apartment window, I can't help but wonder if they've come to collect. When I booked that Airbnb, I wasn't expecting anything fancy. I just needed a quiet place to stay for a week while doing some freelance work in a small coastal town. The listing described it as a rustic artist's cabin near the wetlands. The photos showed a small wooden house surrounded by tall grass and reeds, with water glimmering just beyond the backyard. It looked peaceful, isolated, the kind of place where I could focus. The host's name was Brian, and his profile said he was an environmental lawyer who specialized in avian protection and migratory species law. I didn't think much about that part until later. He'd sent a few overly detailed check-in messages, including reminders not to disturb local wildlife and to avoid touching any feathers found on the property. It sounded a bit eccentric, but I'd stayed in stranger places. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't just a few birds chirping. It was hundreds, maybe thousands, overlapping cries and calls echoing across the marsh. The air seemed thick with wings and motion. Every few seconds, a cluster of black shapes would rise and fall over the water, like smoke lifting from the reeds. The cabin itself was small but tidy. Everything inside was wood, floorboards, furniture, even the window frames. It smelled faintly of cedar and salt air. There were stacks of books on every surface, most about wildlife, conservation, and law. On the kitchen counter, a binder labeled Property Rules and Guidelines sat open. Inside were laminated pages outlining what I could and couldn't do. No feeding birds, no music outside, no bright lights after sunset, no removing natural materials. On the last page, taped in the corner, was a printed line that made me pause. Birds are considered legal tender under local environmental preservation law. Beneath that, in smaller text, it said, "Violations will be reported to the proper authorities." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, maybe an inside reference to the host's bird law background. But the tone of the rules wasn't funny. It read like a real legal notice, the kind of thing someone would quote in court. I shrugged it off and unpacked my things. The first night was calm, except for the noise outside. The sound of wings brushing against the roof, claws tapping lightly on the deck railing, faint cries echoing through the trees. It never really stopped. When I looked out the window around midnight, the silhouettes of birds lined the power lines and the fence posts, motionless and watching. By the third day, I'd gotten used to the noise. What I didn't get used to was how clean everything stayed. No bird droppings, no feathers scattered around, no nests. For how many birds I saw every morning, the place should have been filthy. But every surface, the porch, the railing, even the ground under the trees, looked swept. One afternoon, while taking a break from work, I walked down the narrow trail behind the cabin that led to the marsh. The air grew heavier as I got closer to the water. The smell was strong. Mud, algae, and something metallic underneath. Birds covered the shoreline, so many that the ground looked alive. They didn't scatter when I approached. They just turned, hundreds of eyes following me. About halfway down the path, I noticed a small wooden structure, like a kiosk or booth, with a sign that read, Exchange office. It looked handmade, painted with careful letters. On the table inside were dozens of feathers organized by type and color, laid out like currency. Each section had a label. 1 sparrow feather equals 10 units. Crow feather equals 25 units. Heron feather equals 100 units. There was also a small metal box attached to the side, the kind used for donations or keys. Written on it in permanent marker were the words, "Transactions final." I stood there, staring at it, trying to understand if it was some sort of art installation. But there were fingerprints in the dust around the box and fresh mud on the ground. Someone had been there recently. That evening, I heard what sounded like someone walking around outside. Not footsteps exactly, but soft thuds, as if something heavy was being dropped onto the deck one piece at a time. When I looked through the blinds, I saw several dark shapes scattered across the boards. Dead birds. They weren't mangled, just motionless, lying in neat rows. It was too deliberate to be random. I opened the door just enough to see better. Every bird had a single feather missing, plucked cleanly from the wing. The missing feathers were gone. I didn't touch anything. I closed the door and locked it. In the morning, the deck was spotless again. No bodies, no stains, not even a trace of feathers. It was as if someone had come in the night and cleaned everything away. That day, I decided to drive into town to clear my head. I stopped by a small diner, the kind of place where everyone knows each other. While I sat there eating, I overheard 2 locals talking about the wetlands guy. They said he'd been in trouble years ago for running some kind of environmental experiment without permits. Something to do with property rights and bird populations. They said he'd gone too far trying to prove a legal theory. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something new. A stack of envelopes on the table near the door, each marked invoice. My name was written on the top one in neat block letters. Inside was a printed receipt. Use of land, 7 days. Noise disturbance, 3 instances. Environmental infringement, 1 feather taken, unpaid. Total due, 275 units, crow feather equivalent. There was even a signature line at the bottom labeled, tenant confirmation. I stared at it, not knowing whether to laugh or worry. I hadn't taken any feathers. I hadn't done anything. Still, something about the format of that paper, the formality of it, made me feel like it was serious. That night was the worst. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of fluttering. Not outside, but inside the cabin. The air was thick, the sound everywhere at once. I sat up and saw shadows moving along the ceiling, wings beating softly against the walls. The noise was overwhelming, a living storm of motion. When I turned on my phone flashlight, the light caught dozens of birds perched along the tops of the bookshelves, the back of the couch, the windowsills. They didn't move when the light hit them. They just stared at me, heads turning in tiny jerks. I sat frozen, not wanting to breathe too loudly. After a few long minutes, they started moving again, one by one, flying out through a gap in the roof vent I hadn't noticed before. When the last one disappeared, the room was silent again. I got up to check the door, still locked. Every window still closed. In the morning, another envelope was waiting on the counter. This one was stamped in red ink, past due. It read, "Failure to settle environmental debt. Compensation expected in kind. Avian property holds right of collection." There was something small inside the envelope, a single crow feather. I packed my things right then and there. I didn't even bother to make the bed or clean the dishes. I threw my bag in the car and drove away, not stopping until I reached a motel on the highway. When I checked my phone later that night, there was a new message from the Airbnb host. It said, "Thank you for your stay. The marsh appreciated your contribution. Your account is settled." Attached was a photo of my car parked outside the cabin that morning, surrounded by hundreds of birds sitting quietly on the roof, the fence, and the power lines above. I never replied. I deleted my Airbnb account a week later. Sometimes, when I'm outside and see a crow circling overhead, I think about that place, about the envelopes, the rows of feathers laid out like money, the way those birds watched me like I was part of some transaction I didn't understand. Maybe to people like Brian, those birds really were legal tender, property, proof, payment. Maybe he believed it so much that he made it true in his own way. All I know is that I left owing something I can't measure. And every now and then, when I find a single feather lying on my doorstep, I can't help but think it's a reminder that the debt doesn't really disappear. It just waits somewhere out there in the reeds.
I was driving late at night, long past the time I should have been on the road. It was one of those drives you don't plan but end up making anyway. A mix of exhaustion and stubbornness pushing you to keep going when you know you'd be better off stopping. The road stretched ahead like a black ribbon, unbroken except for the white dashes of paint that flashed in and out of the headlights. The sky above was starless, thick with low clouds, and the darkness pressed in hard against the narrow cone of light my car cut through. The farther I got, the emptier the world seemed. Town lights had dropped away miles back, and now it was just me, the hum of the tires, and the steady vibration of the engine. Even the radio had given up. Static had drowned out every station until I turned it off completely. It felt like I was moving deeper and deeper into nothing, the kind of place where no one would find you if something went wrong. I tried to stay calm, but the silence made it hard. I kept glancing into the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but the road stayed black. Every time I looked, the emptiness felt heavier, like the world was folding in tighter around me. The trees along the highway leaned close, their shapes just barely visible, twisting shadows pressed against each other. Then I saw something ahead. At first, it was just a faint glow, a weak light flickering low near the shoulder. My chest tightened immediately. Out here, there shouldn't have been anything. I slowed down as the glow grew stronger, headlights bouncing off a stalled car on the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked a dull orange, weak and irregular, like the battery was nearly dead. I drifted into the left lane as I passed, my eyes flicking to the side. There was no one inside. The driver's seat was empty, the windows fogged just slightly from the cool night air. Something about that hit me harder than if I had seen someone sitting there. An empty car, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with its lights still flashing. It felt wrong, like a story that hadn't finished yet. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake it. My mind started running circles, imagining reasons. A breakdown, someone walking to find help, maybe even an accident in the woods nearby. Each thought made my skin crawl a little more. Not 10 minutes later, I saw another set of lights. This time it was farther off the road, deep in the trees. A faint white beam like a flashlight cutting between trunks. I slowed again without meaning to, my heart pounding. It wasn't normal to see a light out there. It wasn't like camping season, and it wasn't close to a trailhead. It was just thick woods, the kind people didn't wander into casually. As I crept forward, my headlights caught something else. The outline of a figure standing at the edge of the trees. My hands tightened on the wheel. The person wasn't moving, just standing there, half turned toward the road, half toward the woods. I couldn't make out details, only the solid shape frozen in place. I didn't stop. I didn't even let myself slow too much. I pressed the accelerator and forced myself to keep going. Eyes locked ahead, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But my mind wouldn't let it go. That stranded car, the lights in the woods, the person standing there. It all tied together in my head in ways I didn't want to think about. My stomach churned. I kept glancing at the mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me again. But there was still nothing. Just the black road and the beam of my own car stretching forward. The next half hour was a blur of fear and focus. Every mile dragged on forever, my eyes straining at the dark edges of the road, waiting for something else to appear. When I finally saw the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance, I almost cried with relief. I pulled in fast, my tires crunching over the gravel lot. The station was mostly empty, just one truck idling near the far pump. The driver inside with the seat leaned back. I shut off my engine and sat there for a long time, my whole body still buzzing with adrenaline. The thing that stuck with me wasn't just the car, or the lights in the woods, or the figure by the tree. It was how calm they had all seemed. None of it had moved, none of it had felt like an accident. It was all just still. like I had driven through the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see, and the only reason I made it out was because I didn't stop. Even now, when I think about it, I realize how close I might have been to something I don't want to understand. That car on the shoulder, empty with its hazards dying out, was more than just a breakdown. The lights in the woods weren't campers, and that figure at the edge of the trees wasn't just watching the forest. I don't know what was happening out there, but I know one thing for sure. If I had pulled over, if I had slowed down more than I did, if I had let myself care just a little too much, I don't think I'd have made it to that gas station. I think the road would have stayed empty behind me, and my car would have been the one sitting there with its lights blinking into the dark. That drive changed the way I see night roads. I don't stop anymore when I see stranded cars in the middle of nowhere. I don't look too long into the trees when I see a light. I just keep driving, because sometimes the scariest thing you can do is give your curiosity even a second of control. And the part that keeps me awake sometimes isn't what I saw. It's what I didn't see. The story that was unfolding in those woods as I passed. The one I only caught the edges of. Whatever it was enough to remind me that out there, at night, far from anyone else, you never really know how close you are to danger until it's too late.
I booked an Airbnb on the outskirts of a small coastal town for a week. It wasn't planned. I had a few vacation days stacked up, and I wanted to get away from people, noise, and city air. The listing looked decent. A small, one-bedroom guest house behind the host's main home, surrounded by trees and a short walk from the beach. The pictures showed white walls, a wooden deck, and big windows that let in soft sunlight. It looked quiet, isolated, and perfect for me. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. The neighborhood wasn't empty, but it was spaced out, each house hidden behind hedges or trees. The driveway was gravel, crunching under my tires as I parked near the side gate. The host had left a key in a small lockbox attached to the back door, just as described. I checked my phone, no signal, and felt that strange, sudden quiet you get when you're completely disconnected. The guest house smelled faintly of cleaning products and sea salt. It was neat and minimal, almost too neat. The furniture looked brand new, and the bed was made with hospital corners. A narrow hallway led to a kitchen that overlooked the host's backyard through a wide glass door. There was a note on the counter with the Wi-Fi password and some general rules, nothing unusual. Don't leave food outside. Don't adjust the thermostat too much. Lock the doors before bed. The first night was uneventful. I cooked pasta, read for a while, and went to bed early. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound that took me a second to place. A low, dull thud from outside. I thought maybe it was a branch falling or the wind. I listened for a minute, but it stopped. When I checked the window, all I saw was the faint outline of the host's house in the dark. No lights, no movement. I went back to sleep. The next morning was foggy and damp. I made coffee and sat on the deck, listening to the ocean in the distance. The backyard was enclosed by a tall wooden fence, but I could see through the slats into the neighboring yard. It was overgrown, with piles of wood and old garden tools lying around. At one point, I saw a shape move between the bushes, maybe a cat, maybe a raccoon. I brushed it off and went inside. That afternoon, I went for a long walk along the beach trail, came back around dusk, and noticed something odd as soon as I stepped onto the deck. The glass sliding door had smudge marks on it, long, greasy streaks near the bottom. I thought maybe a bird had hit it, but the pattern looked like fingers. 5 streaks dragging upward, slightly curved. I touched them. They were dry, like someone had pressed their hand there hours ago. I wiped them away with a towel, trying not to think too much about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something again. This time, it was softer, like a scraping or a slow drag of something against the wooden deck. I lay still for a minute, listening. Then came a faint knock. Not loud, just a light tap-tap near the glass door. My stomach dropped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Came again. Tap. Top. I got up slowly and walked to the kitchen, keeping the lights off. Through the glass, I could see the reflection of the room, but outside, beyond the reflection, there was nothing but blackness. The yard light from the main house was off. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see past my own outline. Something flickered at the edge of my vision. A quick shape, low to the ground, moving away toward the fence. I barely slept after that. When daylight came, everything looked normal again. I checked the deck. No footprints, no sign of anything. I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or stray dog. Still, I started keeping the blinds closed at night and made sure the door was locked twice. By the 4th day, I noticed a pattern. Every morning, when I stepped outside, something small would be different. The garden hose, which had been coiled by the fence, was stretched out across the yard one morning. Another day, a single garden glove sat on the deck rail, damp with dew. On the 5th morning, I found the small outdoor trash bin tipped over, with the lid set neatly beside it. Not tossed or blown away, but placed. That evening, I sat on the couch trying to read, but I kept glancing toward the glass door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the yard each night. When it got dark, I turned off all the lights inside and stood by the window, watching. Hours passed. Around 1:30, I saw a faint movement, something shifting near the fence line. My eyes adjusted, and I could make out a figure crouched low, right where the shadows were thickest. It wasn't moving toward the house, just crouching, staring. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my phone when I tried to record it. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. I barely made it through that night. I sat awake until dawn, the lights on, staring at the deck door. As soon as the sun came up, I packed a small bag and decided to leave. I didn't care if it was 6 a.m. or if I'd paid for 2 more nights. I just wanted to be gone. When I opened the door to step outside, something made me stop. On the deck, right against the glass, was a small pile of objects. A feather, a seashell, a single coin, arranged neatly in a small circle like some kind of offering. I stood there staring at it for a long time. The seashell was chipped. The coin was foreign, tarnished. The feather, maybe from a seagull, had tiny red stains near the base. I felt my stomach twist. The placement was deliberate, careful. Someone had stood there while I was inside, close enough to press their face to the glass if they wanted to. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I threw my bag into the car, locked the guest house door behind me, and left. As I drove down the dirt road, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out from the trees. I stopped at a gas station a few miles away and sat in the parking lot until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally turned my phone off airplane mode, a notification popped up, a message from the Airbnb host. It had been sent late the night before. It said, "Just a heads up, our security light in the backyard's been acting up. Sorry if it's been flickering during your stay." That's all it said. Nothing about people or neighbors or animals. Just that single sentence. I never told the host about the marks on the glass or the things left on the deck. I didn't leave a review. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. But for weeks afterward, I kept thinking about that pile of objects. The way they were arranged, how precise it was. Someone had been there. Someone who wanted to be seen, just not caught. Someone who liked getting close enough to leave something behind. Every now and then, I wonder if that light really was just broken, or if it had been switched off. Because when I remember those nights, the yard had always been perfectly dark. Not flickering, just off. Completely off. And that means someone had to walk right up to the back of that house in total darkness while I was sleeping just a few feet away, and lay those things down carefully on the deck like they belonged there. I've stayed in a lot of places since then, hotels, cabins, even another Airbnb or two. But I've never booked one with a glass door again. I had been staying in Airbnbs for years, mostly when I traveled for work. I liked how they felt more lived in than hotels, less sterile. You could tell a lot about a person by how they decorated their space, by what they left behind on shelves and in drawers. But there was one stay that stuck with me, not because of the comfort or the decor, but because of something I still can't fully explain without feeling uneasy. It was late summer, a humid stretch of days where everything felt slow and heavy. I booked a small guest house just outside a mid-sized city, a quiet place tucked behind someone's main home, separated by a narrow garden and a line of hedges. The pictures showed a cozy, renovated space with white walls, wooden floors, and lots of natural light. It looked harmless. When I arrived, the host wasn't there, but they'd left clear check-in instructions. The guest house had its own entrance and was stocked like a miniature apartment. There was a faint smell of lavender mixed with something else, like wet wood or animal fur, though I didn't think much of it. A small welcome card sat on the table with a handwritten note. "Make yourself at home. Please keep the windows closed when you're out. Enjoy your stay." The first thing I noticed was how clean the place was, almost unnaturally clean. No clutter, no fingerprints on the glass surfaces, no dust on the shelves. But as I unpacked my things, I started noticing little signs that someone had been there recently, maybe even that morning. A faint warmth lingered in the sheets, and the trash bin in the bathroom had a tissue in it. Nothing alarming, just slightly off. That night, I sat on the couch with my laptop, catching up on emails. Every now and then, I'd hear something, a small creak above me, a shuffle outside the back door, the faint sound of scratching. I assumed it was an animal. The place backed onto woods, and the patio light attracted bugs. Still, there was something about the scratching that didn't sound like a mouse or a raccoon. It came in slow, deliberate bursts, like nails dragging lightly on wood. When I went to bed, I left the bathroom light on, the kind of soft glow that made the space less lonely. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a noise, a dull thud, like something falling in the living room. I listened, still half asleep, trying to convince myself it was nothing. After a few minutes of silence, I drifted back off. The next morning, I found one of the coasters from the coffee table on the floor, a few feet from where it normally sat. Maybe I'd bumped the table, I thought. Maybe I imagined the noise. But there was a tiny smear of something dark on the edge of it. Not blood, but something like it. Dried, brownish, sticky when I ran my thumb over it. I wiped it clean and moved on with my day. That afternoon, I came back after running errands. When I opened the door, the smell hit me. That same faint mix of lavender and fur, but stronger now. It wasn't bad exactly, just wrong. Like someone had been keeping an animal inside for too long. I walked around, checking the rooms. Everything looked untouched. But then I saw it. A single gray cat hair on the kitchen counter. I remember it clearly because the listing had said no pets. I brushed it off and figured maybe the hosts had one and tried to keep it out of the guest area. That night, it rained hard. The sound of water on the roof made the little house feel even smaller. I tried reading, but I kept getting distracted by faint sounds. Soft thumps, scraping, something like pacing. Once, I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the sliding glass door that opened to the garden. I turned to look, but there was nothing there, just the faint shimmer of rain streaks. I decided to call it a night. When I walked into the bedroom, I noticed the blanket was slightly pulled off the bed, like someone had tugged at it. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. My backpack had also been moved a few inches. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to unsettle me. Sleep didn't come easily. I woke several times to that same soft scratching, sometimes from the living room, sometimes from the kitchen. I wanted to check, but the thought of stepping into that dark space froze me in bed. I stayed still, listening until the noises stopped. In the morning, everything looked normal again, except for something sitting neatly in the middle of the coffee table. A dead bird. It was small, maybe a sparrow, with matted feathers and a few drops of dried blood on the surface beneath it. Its neck was twisted at an angle that made me turn away. The front door was locked, the windows were shut, and I couldn't find any sign of how it had gotten inside. My stomach turned when I realized there wasn't a single feather anywhere else. It looked placed there deliberately. I cleaned it up with paper towels, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and threw it outside in the bin. I didn't message the host. I just wanted to finish my stay and leave without making a fuss. Maybe some animal got in, I told myself. Maybe there was a small gap somewhere I hadn't noticed. But the next morning, there was something else. This time it was a small pile of what looked like cat food, placed right where the bird had been. I stood there staring at it, feeling something cold crawl up my spine. It wasn't spilled or scattered. It was arranged in a little mound, perfectly round. I searched every inch of that house. Under the bed, inside cabinets, behind the couch. Nothing. No holes, no droppings, no signs of an animal. I thought about leaving early, but I only had one night left. I convinced myself it was harmless, just some weird coincidence. Maybe the host's cat sneaked in. Maybe a raccoon was somehow clever enough to do all this. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease never left. On my last night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard the scratching again, much louder this time. It was coming from the wall behind the bed, a rhythmic scrape that made the wood vibrate slightly. I pressed my ear against it and could hear faint breathing, or maybe it was the hum of pipes. I couldn't tell. I moved into the living room and sat on the couch until sunrise. When morning came, I packed quickly, avoiding looking around too much. I checked the table one last time before leaving. Sitting there, where the pile of food had been, was something else. A single cat collar. Worn leather, a little frayed, with a small silver bell still attached. There was a dark stain along the inside of the band, like it had once been wet. I left it there, locked the door, and drove off without looking back. Later that week, I got an Airbnb message from the hosts thanking me for keeping the place tidy. They said they'd found the little gift. I left and appreciated it. That confused me, so I checked what they meant. They'd attached a photo, the cat collar, sitting on the table. The message ended with, "Our cat passed away a few months ago. It's nice to know someone still thought of him. Maybe you're cat people too." And that was a tip you left. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to figure out what to say. I hadn't left that collar. I hadn't even touched it. To this day, I don't know what that thing was trying to tell me, or if it was even possible for a cat to still be moving through that house somehow. Not as a ghost, but maybe as something else entirely. All I know is that when I think back on that week, I can still smell that faint mix of lavender and fur, and I can still hear the quiet scrape against the walls at night. Whatever it was, it wasn't done with that place. And maybe the hosts are right. Maybe the collar really was a tip, just not from me.